Hello, and welcome to the Other Minds podcast. I'm Joseph Bohegan. Other Minds, founded in 1992 in San Francisco by Charles Amerkanian and Jim Newman, is devoted to championing the most original voices in new and experimental music. On Season 4 of the podcast, we're talking with a range of composers, performers, and authors across the field of new music, including the featured composers from the 29th Other Minds Festival, which will take place October 16th to 19th, 2025 at the Brava Theater in San Francisco. Today, I'm joined by choreographer Nancy Karp. Karp grew up in Los Angeles, where she was an early student at CalArts. She embraces elaborate structures, working with units of pure movement, investigating their potential through combination and variation. From these structural investigations emerge patterns and phrases that become her dances. In 1980, she founded her dance company, Nancy Karp and Dancers. On night 3 of this year's Other Minds Festival, Nancy Karp will premiere a new piece set to James Tenney's 3 Pieces for Drum Quartet, with dancers Sontre Giles, Katie Kruger, Amy Lewis, and Elizabeth Zepeda. Welcome to the podcast, Nancy.
Thank you.
So you often collaborate with composers in your works and commission composers to write new pieces for dance. So what is that collaborative process like?
Well, it's my favorite way of working. And over the years, each piece of choreography is different with each separate composer. One of the early pieces that we commissioned was a piece we did with Charles Amerkanian, and that was in the mid-'80s. And the process, for example, was he gave me some samples of short pieces and said, which one would you like me to elaborate and extend? And I chose his piece, Dot Bunch, which went from 5 minutes to 25 minutes. And then more recently, commission we did with Khoi Dung. And I discussed with her the concept I wanted to work with, and we actually came up with the title, Memory Place, together. And then we both went separately, starting from scratch, with some ideas that we had discussed, and durations, and sort of the shape of the piece. And then we came together about halfway through. She came to rehearsal, made some changes, and then she came up with a gorgeous piece.
So are you typically going back and forth, the composer is writing as you're working on the choreography?
That's generally the dynamic. I've worked with Paul Drescher, a composer, and he often does the same, a sort of a variation where he'll give me some samples of ideas he's interested in working on that seem to make sense to my ideas. And we try some things in rehearsal, and then see what works, see what doesn't, then develop them further. And I never actually choreograph to the music. I always choreograph in silence, keeping the music kind of in the back of my mind. And then when things seem to gel, that's the best moment. When things don't, then we make adjustments.
Are there particular kinds of things that composers try if they're not used to writing for dance that they think, oh, this is going to work and doesn't work well, or that they try and work really well?
Well, I generally am pretty familiar with the music by the composers I work with. I think I should say that's 100%. So I kind of have an idea of how they're going to work and that we have an understanding. It was an interesting collaboration I did with composer David A. Jaffe, because we spent a very long time, I think the longest time I've worked with a composer just in conversation. And he wanted to know what were the qualities of the music I wanted, or the sound, what was the quality of the movement, what was the shape of each section of the piece he was working on. We decided together on the instrumentation. That was really a back and forth. So when he came up with his composition, I was absolutely thrilled. And I think it was all that, just a little conversation over coffees. I'll never forget the email he sent at one point, which was one word, done. And it's so typically David. I was so excited, and then he sent it to me, and it worked beautifully. He actually performed the mandolin in that piece along with a string quartet.
There's a big CalArts focus at this year's festival. We've got music by James Tenney, Ingrid Marshall, Peter Garland. I know you were a student there in the early days of the school. What was CalArts like at that time?
It was intimate. It was small. The first year, there were just 300 students in the entire institute, so that's 6 schools. And everyone pretty much knew each other or recognized each other. And I think CalArts at that point was trying to be the next Black Mountain College, having really interesting, cutting-edge, avant-garde mentors, teachers, and there were no grades, but you were expected to show up, at least in the dance school. And I just took it for granted that when it came time for me to do my BFA project, that I would have composers available to write music, costume designers to do the costumes, graphic designer to make the poster, and that's what I've carried with me till today. And it was that experience and that encouragement. My mentor was Bella Lewitsky, along with my mentor was Donald McHale, very different styles of dance. And I was taught with my fellow students the fundamentals of choreography. It was quite rigorous, even though it was very open and we all were having a really good time.
What was your dance education like before you got to CalArts?
Well, I wanted to be a little ballet dancer. I mean, I shouldn't say a little ballet dancer. I wanted to be a grand ballet dancer. And the last ballet teacher I took class from was a woman who's quite a maverick. Her name was Carmelita Marache. And she would have us reading Trotsky and Tolstoy, and we'd talk about it in class. And these were what we call, for anyone who knows about ballet training, we were always on point shoes for 2 hours every day. She expected everyone to do that, and it was quite rigorous training. And then I discovered modern dance and just fell in love with that form. But the ballet gave me a nice, strong foundation for that. And then I started studying with Bella Lewitsky, still in high school.
And your new work, which will be premiered at Other Minds, is set to James Tenney's 3 pieces for Drum Quartet, which was originally conceived to be played by a mechanical drum designed by the sound sculptor Stefan van Hoene in the mid-1970s, and was later turned into a live performance piece, which is what people will hear at the festival. Did you know Tenney when you were at CalArts?
Well, I was fortunate to take one class from Jim Tenney.
Oh, wow.
CalArts, they wanted to have this feeling of interdisciplinary studies where everyone was collaborating and so forth, and yet each school only offered, if I remember correctly, one course to the general student body, and he taught a survey course of music from 1950 to the present. And at that time, it was the 70s, okay? So it was about a 20-year span. And he was very inspiring, loved his subject. I never had much one-on-one. It was more of a general class. But of course, I recognized him always in the hallway, along with Stefan van Hoene, who was on faculty in the sculpture department there.
Who did Tenney cover in that class?
He covered Steve Reich. That was my first introduction. I'm 18 years old. I got to hear Steve Reich music, Philip Glass music, Lamont Young music. I was already familiar with Terry Riley. When I was, I think, 15 or 14 or 15, my mother took me to a Terry Riley concert to hear MC. Those are this long distance, what I remember. He probably, just knowing him now and reading more about him, he probably played Charles Ives. He probably played Ruggles. He probably played all those people that he was a big fan of as well.
Did you ever have the chance to work with him when he was alive?
Not professionally or not collaboratively. It was an interesting, I don't want to use this, well, I'll use it, I can't think of another word, hierarchy. Well, the students really worked with each other. Yeah. And then the mentors, who a lot of them were only 10 years older than us, they worked with one another. Yeah.
So what drew you to wanting to do this new piece, to the 3 pieces for Drum Quartet?
Well, someone had played this for me. I became acquainted with the music, and I just went mad over it. And I think it was the structure of it. And I contacted Jody Diamond, who's now distributing the Frog Peak music, and said, can I get a score of this? I really want to look at this score. And looking visually at the score and the structure and all the elements and how he works with repetition and retrograde, all these ways of constructing the piece is very much akin to the way I work. And I thought, I want to tackle this. And I've never worked with live drummers before. I've worked mainly with other instruments. And so it was a good challenge. Also, when I saw the configuration of the drums on the stage, I thought, oh, wow, this will be fantastic to try to work with floor patterns that are compatible with the placement of the stationary drums.
Could you talk more about what those structural elements are that you're really drawn to that connects your work to Tenney's?
Well, I like choreographically working with small fragments of movement and inverting them, retrograding them, repeating part of them, and then adding something else, having dancers making variations on movement phrases that I do. And I see that kind of structure starting with a music fragment and then expanding it gradually more and more and more, and the layering of all of that's becomes something very complex and visually quite beautiful.
I know you were also working on the choreography for this piece when you were doing a residency in Venice. What influence did being in Venice have on your work?
Well, I was there for a month, and of course, you're surrounded by water and the glistening light on the water. And I spent daily just walking along the small canals and just observing the water. And I was taking videos and photos of the movement of the water and the gentleness of it. There's an Italian word, leggero, sort of a light softness of things I found in Venice. And I'm finding the world right now is so harsh that I wanted to make a piece that was counter to that. That experience was not, eating the delicious risotto and trying to make a risotto for my dance, but rather just the quality of the environment. It was very easy, actually, in March to get away from the tourists and experience this. I know people often get very frustrated, but on the Giudecca, the island across from where most of the tourists enjoy themselves. It was a bit calmer, and the reflections in the water. I was really enjoying the vaporetto, and also the way that I found people were with each other. The local people seem very gentle and very open. Even the way they speak the language is very different than in other parts of Italy, I found. And so there's a gentleness about the choreography, I think, and a softness. And also it rained. And the first piece, Wake, I'm kind of making it a pun in my mind. It's a wake for Charles Ives, but a wake the water, the wake behind a boat, and that kind of motion is something that we've been playing with. And I asked the dancers as they first enter the stage to think that they're walking through a light rain, and how does that feel on their body? And that was something that I was experiencing a lot during the month of March.
You talked a little bit about this, but since most of our listeners are coming from a music background, would you talk some more about what musical elements become important as you work on a new choreography?
I looked at the quartets individually and tried to understand the underlying structure of each and tried to use some of those elements as choreographic tools for each of the sections, as well as the qualities of the sound. And then I made notes in my notebook. What color would I address to each of these? And they're all very different.
You also gave a little bit of a hint at the positioning of the drums in the piece. So in one piece, they're in a row at the front, and another, they're more spread out. And then in the bass drum piece, they're surrounding the audience. So how is that going to work in the Brava Theater? And then how are the dancers incorporated into that spatialization idea?
Well, I wanted each quartet to have its own character. And so, for example, in Wake, we have one dancer enter one at a time, similar as the voices in the music. And that's where we take off. Rather than illustrating the music, just the introduction of the dancers comes in. And the dancers work in pairs, they work in canon. I love working in canon because that adds a complexity. I often will make a phrase, and you'll maybe be able to recognize a base phrase of which we make some variations. And the dancers make the variations, and then I pick and choose and reform the phrase from that. So, for example, I'll jump to the last quartet in which Tenney chose a short fragment of Ionization by Edgar Varese. And so as soon as I read that in his notes, I immediately went online to hear Ionization, which was one of the most popular pieces when I was going to school back at CalArts. Everyone was choreographing to it. It was like the maverick piece, and everyone wanted to grab it. And I hadn't heard it in years. And so I grabbed that short phrase that he took, the duration and the quality of it, and made a movement phrase that became a dialogue with that. And then we expanded it, and hopefully you'll see this phrase repeated in different ways in that section. The middle quartet, Hocket, I really enjoyed the idea of a structure of a Hocket. And so we worked with that concept of a call and response, one dancer performing a phrase, and then just as she's finishing, the next dancer, almost like a relay, continues the phrase, or two dancers are starting and a third continues it on. So that's how I work with the structure. You asked maybe a different question, what will the audience expect to see? I think some of the themes that we've worked with, they'll be able to identify and see how we've worked with these phrases. Maybe not.
Time will tell.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that you think people should know before they come to the performance?
Well, one thing I'm often asked about when I make dances, how much the music influences the dance. And we've been talking kind of around that. And again, I do choreograph in silence because I feel that the dance needs to hold its own. And the dance is about pure movement. And so it's, rather than telling a story, it's all about the beauty of that movement.
You can see Nancy Karp's new choreographed work set to James Tenney's 3 pieces for Drum Quartet at Other Minds Festival 29 on Saturday, October 18th, 2025 at the Brava Theater in San Francisco. Thank you, Nancy, for joining me today, and thanks everyone for listening. This has been an episode of the Other Minds podcast, brought to you by Other Minds. Our 29th festival is October 16th to 19th, 2025 at the Brava Theater in San Francisco. Join us again next week.